Good evening. This is Bible Answers. My name is Evan Gregory. We're going to be looking at John chapter 19 tonight, and we'll have the verses as always on the screen so you can follow along here. And this is brought to you by the North Columbus Church of Christ located in Columbus, Mississippi. Our website is scrolling below me. It's northcolumbuschristians.com. And we have a YouTube page. All of our videos get uploaded to our YouTube pages, and our page name is North Columbus Church of Christ. And so, also, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave a comment on Facebook or YouTube, and I'll try to respond to it. And so we like questions. We like to talk about the Bible, and so any questions that you have regarding that, even if it's outside of the topic at hand, like to discuss those things. And so it's been a few weeks back. We were looking at the first part of John chapter 19, and we ended in verse 22. And John chapter 19 is where we see Jesus' trial, and ultimately we'll see his crucifixion. And throughout his trial, and I say the term trial and use that loosely. It was it was to say the least. It seemed like a mock trial. The Jews bring Jesus to Pilate. Pilate knows that Jesus is innocent. He might think he's a little weird, a little strange, maybe a little crazy, but he's certainly not done anything against the Roman law, and he knows that he was innocent. But the Jews insisted on having him crucified, and so eventually we do see where Pilate relented and allowed the Jews to do this. And so we ended in verse 22 that Jesus is they take Jesus out to this place called Golgotha, and he's put on the cross. And this is where we ended last time. So we'll start in verses 23 through 24. It says, Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made four parts, to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was without seam, woven from the top in one piece. They said therefore among themselves, Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things. So we see, so Jesus had been beaten, and then they take him to Golgotha. He has to carry, or attempts to carry, his cross. We know from other places that he could not make it the entire way carrying his cross. Now we see where they are crucifying Jesus, and it's while this is happening, we see this scene apart from Jesus, where these soldiers are taking Jesus's garments, and they come to this tunic without seam, and they say, "Let's cast lots for this." And this is like, uh, it's almost akin to drawing straws. Whoever draws the shortest straw wins. So this is what was happening here, is they were casting lots as they put it for this. And so notice that this John here points out that this fulfilled Scripture. It says they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. What you'll notice with John and the other writers of the Gospel is that they are constantly bringing up Old Testament scriptures that reference what's going on. We'll see others here shortly these other prophecies that are fulfilled, and this one. You look at this one. It says, "Well, and for my clothing, that they cast lots." That's pretty interesting that actually did happen. Now, you also may be thinking, well, this is not. I mean, there's probably a lot of people that this happens to them. Okay, that people cast lots for the garments, and that's not really anything, and it's not a big deal as far as confirming who Jesus was. But one thing, what these scriptures do when the writers do mention the scripture was fulfilled by this, and then it was fulfilled by that, is it does continue to build the case for who Jesus was. Now, casting lots for his clothing may be a prophecy that's, well, there could be 1,000 other people that this happened to. Okay. And so it may not be a strong prophecy, but when you think of something as though, when we see the miracles that Jesus did and what he was able to do, and we see these other prophecies about what he was going to do, what was going to happen to him, and how he was going to die, that all of these prophecies together do start building up the case for who Jesus was. And so when you think of it as, you're bringing something to court and you have all of the evidence, one piece of evidence may not be able to convict, but when you have just pieces and pieces of evidence that all keep pointing back to the same individual, it's hard to draw the conclusion that this was not the person who did it. And in part, and as far as Jesus is concerned here, when you look at all these other prophecies, it's hard to make the case that this is not the one that the prophecies were written about. And so we see this happening. So Jesus here is being crucified. And in the meantime, we see these soldiers, and they're not really even concerned about Jesus. They're more concerned about his clothing. And apparently this tunic was of high value to them, in which they were willing to cast lots for it. So we see the soldiers do those things, and that takes us to verses 25 through 30. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, the Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour that disciple took her to his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now a vessel full of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled the sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and put it to his mouth. So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, It is finished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. So we see the soldiers there. We see Jesus' mother, his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene standing by the cross. And notice what Jesus does. He speaks to his mother. He tells his mother, Woman, behold your son. And the son that Jesus is referencing it to is, as the writer here, so remember this is John, the disciple whom he loves standing by. Now, it's not specifically said who this is, but it's generally understood that this is John himself, that Jesus was speaking to John, and he told John by this, him saying, Woman, behold your son, and then telling the disciple, Behold your mother, that Jesus was telling John, you need to take care of her. You need to take care of Mary. And this is what he did. He says, and from that hour, that disciple took her to his own home. And I think this is another instance where you see Jesus' concern for others. Here he is, and he's fixing to die, but he's setting things in order while he's on the cross. That he's looking out for his own mother, and how she was going to be took care of after he died. And we see where John, and again, it's generally accepted this is John, was going to take her into his own home. Now we see after that, Jesus says that he thirsts. They had the sponge with sour wine, and then finally we see where he says it is finished. And that statement points to why he was here. Now there's multiple reasons why he was here, but ultimately the primary reason was for people to have forgiveness of their sins, and this required him to die. A Hebrew writer will say, without shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. That this is what had to happen. And so we see Jesus and Jesus having to die for that. And he's him saying it's finished. He's saying this is all my job here is done. It is finished. This the forgiveness of sins can now happen as a result of him sacrificing himself for the people. And we see here that he gave up his spirit, so he died here on the cross. And so this is what we see here is this is the most important event that has ever occurred in history. And we see that again that at this point that this was how one's sins were going to be forgiven through Jesus. This is what had to take place for those sins to be forgiven. And now it's possible because he was willing to suffer those things. If you're familiar with the Bible and you read the other Gospels and it's not fully stated in the earlier chapters of John of Jesus's prayer and time in Gethsemane that there was. I mean, he if there was a way in which he could avoid going to the cross, uh, that's what he wanted to do. We see that what he prayed. If there was, if there's any way else, uh, you know, this is, anything but this. But at the end, he still submitted to God's will. He says, if it's your will, let your will be done. That if there was another way to accomplish this, that's what he wanted to take. But he was still willing to submit to God. And we see that he accomplished the Father's will. And we see the blessings that result uh, as a result of him willing to really humble, humiliate himself, and to die for us. So that takes us to verses 31 through 37. It says, therefore, because it was the preparation day, that the body should not remain on the cross of the Sabbath, for the Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken, that they might be taken away. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the others who crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs, but one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true. And he knows that he's telling the truth so that you may believe. For these things were done that the scripture should be fulfilled. Not one of his bones shall be broken. And then again, another scripture says, they shall look on whom they pierced. So, the Jews, they were wanting to speed up things. Jesus is dead. The other two, remember there were two others on each side of him being crucified as well. They were not dead. And so the Jews wanted to speed up the process. And they didn't want the bodies to remain on the cross on the Sabbath. Now, remember, this was a time, so it says this was the preparation day. This is the preparation day for the Passover. So this is a big event for the Jews. And they wanted their bodies off of the cross. They wanted them to be done away with. And so they had to speed up the process of everybody dying. And so the Jews want the legs of the people on the cross to be broken. And so I don't know the ins and outs of being on the cross, but you would have to, from what I understand, in order to be able to breathe, you would have to be able to basically pick yourself up by your legs to be able to breathe. And so now that their legs are broke, they're not able to push themselves up. They're basically hanging by their arms or hands. And so it's much more difficult for them to breathe. And so this is speeding up the process of them dying. And then we see that they come to Jesus. So the soldiers come to Jesus, and he's already dead. So they don't break his legs, but they see where they pierce him with the spear. And it says immediately blood and water came out. I don't know exactly why that. There's a lot of reasons that people have as to why blood and water came out. That there's medical reasons. People I've heard, and I can't remember exactly what was said, but I've heard of more spiritual reasons as to why this may be the case. I don't know. But we do see, I would, at the very least, I think that is indicative of the shape that Jesus's body was in. That, I mean, when you have the blood and water separating out together, and it would be indicative that he was not in good shape when he died, which again would speak to what he suffered. But again, I don't know. It's not said exactly why that's the case. And again, there's other reasons, and my reason might be wrong, but that would be what I would say in regards of that. But the main point here, so the one who is testifying, he says that his testimony is true. John is saying, "I've seen these things. I've seen these things. I know what I'm talking about. I'm telling the truth." But yet, so he's seen it because he's already previously mentioned that he was there. Jesus is telling him to take care of his mother. But notice we still have other scriptures. He says the scripture should be fulfilled. Not one of his bones should be broken. Again, another Old Testament prophecy about Jesus and what was going to happen to him. Now, one of his bones shall be broken. Okay, that's another one. And again, another scripture says they shall look on him whom they pierce. So his bones weren't broken, but he was pierced. So again, these another one of these prophecies that is you look at, well, not one of his bones shall be broken. Well, that can fit in a lot of people's description. Or, well, this person wasn't pierced. Well, that fits into a lot of other people's description. But again, the same person in which they're talking about, again, these multiple prophecies. Well, he's not going to be pierced. His bones aren't going to be broken. We see that they cast lots for the clothes, and on and on and on and on. We see these prophecies that again build up the case. Who did this? Who was able to fit this description? And we see that Jesus did all those things. Verses 38 through 42, it says, "After this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took the body of Jesus, and Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, and Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Now, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. In the garden, a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby." We see two men here coming to Jesus. The first we see was Joseph of Arimathea. He's a disciple of Jesus, but still he's not making that known publicly. But what I would say is that regardless of him being secret about this, is it would take a lot of courage to come. We just saw the Jews kill this guy. Okay. All right. We know Joseph it says that he has fear of the Jews. So it would take a lot of courage for him to go and get the body of Jesus. And we see that he went to Pilate so that he can get and take away the body of Jesus. So, I'm going to give Joseph some credit here on what he did. Now, again, he didn't have everything right. He wasn't open and public about uh, himself being a disciple of Jesus, but we do see where he showed some courage here. And then we also see Nicodemus. Now, Nicodemus, notice what it says, who at first came to Jesus by night. This goes back all the way to John chapter 3. Nicodemus coming to him at night, talking to him about certain things. He at first came to Jesus by night, being secretive again, and so Nicodemus comes again, but this is not by night. This is a little more open, uh, and so we see here that he brings these myrrh and aloes to prepare Jesus's body. And so we see also that he was laid in a new tomb. Okay, so he was crucified. Where he was crucified, there was a garden in the garden, a new tomb which no one had yet been laid. And if I remember correctly, it's not stated here in chapter 19, but in another gospel, it will talk about that this. If I remember that this tomb was a good tomb. It was not a tomb for a poor man, which that was another prophecy that was fulfilled. And now I'm going blank, but it was basically that he was, basically buried or laid with wealthy individuals. Okay. And so again, I don't have the exact quote on that, but there was a prophecy there that was filled just in where he was buried too. And so they got him in the tomb. They laid him there because the Jews' preparation day again was. It looks like though there was the Jews. They were wanting to get Jesus dealt with, but they were also scurrying around to get everything ready, situated for this preparation day, ultimately for the Passover. And so it's very interesting that we see these people that are so focused on doing something that God did tell them to do. That was part of the old law. But at the same time, they're crucifying the Messiah. They're crucifying God's Son at the same day that they're doing this. And they're doing all of these things in their own mind in the name of God as well. And so we see that contrast there. And so that is John chapter 19. We see Jesus has now died. We'll come back later, we'll finish up John, but we'll see that this is not the end of the story for Jesus. That he was not just crucified and he just died and that was it. We'll see that there's something else, um, some more information to the story that we'll get into at a later time. But as always, I hope this has been useful for all of you. If you got questions or comments, feel free to leave them here. We'll keep on trucking. We'll start looking at John chapter 20. Hopefully it'll be next week. The last few weeks we weren't able to do it between holidays and technical difficulties and all that good stuff. We weren't able to get to it, but we're gonna do what we can. So hope that this has been useful, and hope that you all have a good day and a good rest of the week. Thanks.